Well, looks like everything's working, so that's probably pretty good. Let's go wiggle this guy a little bit. There we go. Alrighty. Come on. Actually, my chair is sinking, so you got to move down a little. Okay, cool beans. All right, so what do we got today? Um, well, I was just gonna kind of casually work on some terrain. Um, but really, I primarily wanted to talk about some of the gaming stuff that I've done kind of on the channel recently, and sort of like what I want to do next. Um, because I did a stream recently where I tried to combine the gameplay of this, which I love, with the campaign system of this, and I'm not going to mince words. It was pretty much an objective failure, if I'm totally completely honest. Basically, it just didn't work. Part of that is the fact that this campaign system just doesn't work for me. Um, Setting up for my first battle was about 37 minutes, 35 minutes, something like that. Like it was damn near 40 minutes to just get to the game, right? Now, I'm a pretty broken person, right? And I'd be lying if I said I had more energy recently than I did in the past. Because over the last couple of years, it's definitely gotten worse. Um, so I playing a game. I love playing like the tabletop games, right? Like you can even play by myself, anything. Like it's still fun, right? Like I love it to pieces. Um, but it takes energy, right? And it does sap it out of you. Part of that is the setup for me. A lot of the setup really draws from me as a person. So spending 40 minutes setting up a campaign was frankly just too much, just flat out 100% too much. Um, so I'm not going to be able to use this campaign system. This seems like a nice book. Campaign system seems neat. There's a lot of variation and stuff, but like it's not going to work for me. So I need to find a way to still have a campaign system and reduce the activation energy. Um, and I would like to base it around Frostgrave. I really like Frostgrave as a system. I think it's very fun. Um, so I'm thinking I would like to base it around Frostgrave. So I need a way to kind of kind of bridge that gap. Where I can still have the randomness of a cool campaign system, but get into a game quickly so that I still have energy to actually play the game when it comes time to play the game. Ugh. So I've been kind of kicking around that idea. And this is the City of Ash terrain. You kind of get two terrain pieces on that. You get these two different like broken building corners. They're pretty cool. They look really nice. I wish there was a set of terrain that like matched this. Because like the detail and stuff in this is really cool. It's got a really neat view like look to it. Um Very like Victorian kind of like I think it's neat. But you only get these two pieces and you get a couple bits of scatter terrain. You get like a barricade. Woo. That's kind of like it. Ironically, I bought that box for the rats, but I'm saving the rats, and instead I've been painting the knights. Um, and they're pretty cool. I like them. They got a bunch of them have like little animal helmets and stuff. Um, so I tried to go with a yellow and green, which is it's a faction color set from Oblivion. I don't remember the name of which city it's from though. I think it's like the woodsy city to the north. But yeah, they're nice models. They're pretty cool. They have a little bit of customization, not a ton. But they've got a little bit. I did things like put all their shields on their back and stuff like that, so that um, Even the guys that are like double wielding like these two, um, they still had a shield. As I liked that it helped tie the color in, and also I don't know, seemed kind of weird to have a knight without a shield. So, but yeah, they're pretty fun. They're pretty fun model. So the stuff that's terrain that's in that box is also pretty fun, but you don't get a whole ton of it. But I thought it would be a nice kind of passive thing to work on while I talked about making some apps today. So this is actually Cracker Barrel paint, or Apple Barrel, I guess it's called. So this is like the Walmart cheapo brand. I'm going to use this for my base brown colors, and then kind of like all the colors after that are going to be hobby paints. But I wanted to get I want to get the initial kind of rough and ready down just with some cheapo paint. Um, just because in this first couple like steps there tends to be a good bit of waste. So, all right. So let's talk apps. I really liked that campaign map builder thing we used. It's a very good app. I am super impressed with it. 10 out of 10. Um, Worked really well. Uh, it's sort of what's giving me the motivation to do this, or to make kind of my own kind of campaign app, because I really liked that app. It was very useful, and I think it would be cool to make something that's as useful for people, particularly people like me that don't have a lot of energy for kind of like setting up the game. So something that sort of like streamlines that and makes it a little bit easier, I think would be really good. Um, so yeah, for anyone wondering, this is just an overbrush of this brown color. Um, we'll probably be doing 2 layers of this. My goal here is just basically to get some color down on the model. All right, this is my starting like layer essentially, and then from here we'll go in and pick out the like kind of more specific detail colors as we need them. So, but yeah, so that map making app that we looked at, it's kind of inspiring me here. So my thought is to make something that reduces the energy needed to have a campaign system, right? Um, could you use AI for this? Probably. Let me rephrase that. Could you use AI for this? Yes, definitely, 100%. Um, but I don't really want to make something that's going to need tokens or accounts or anything like that. I want to make something that kind of like anyone can use. I want to throw it up on itch.io. Um, and I want people to be able to enjoy it without any other bullshit, right? So, uh, you know, so we're gonna avoid the AI route. That's a given. Though AI would probably be pretty good for this, for setting up some campaign stuff. But we're gonna do it the old-fashioned way, and we're gonna use a whole bunch of tables and logic, which I'm gonna be honest is a lot more fun than programming with AI. Anyway, so that's gonna be my enjoyable part of it. So, all right, we know we're gonna use a whole bunch of tables, whole bunch of logic to make ourselves a campaign app. What does a campaign app actually entail? This is kind of the question that I've been kicking around, right? And my brain goes a couple different ways on it. I kind kind of want to talk through those, right? So, all right, so there's our first layer down. You can see it's not very good. So what we're going to do is we'll be back to this with another overbrush to get it more color, right? We're going to have to build up in layers a little bit because this cheapo paint does suck. And we are kind of brushing it on quickly here. So we're not going for like crazy absolute coverage. So that makes it suck doubly more so. But we'll give her a minute to set up. All right, so what do we want from a campaign app? Before, in the past, and actually on the channel, I've coded apps. I've coded like logic apps for dictating enemy movements, that kind of stuff. I've coded random event tables, all that kind of stuff, right? So the world's kind of our oyster there. We can kind of do what we want or what we think is really needed for that kind of stuff, right? We're not limited in any way in that regard. But what would a campaign app entail? Well, it's going to entail, I'm going to be thinking about this from the Frostgrave lens, right? So we need a event table when you pick up loot. Okay, we need a random event table when you pick up loot. We can do that. All right. We need a random event table at the end of the round. Okay, so we got 2 random event tables. We need one for setting up the mission. I think this one's probably one of the most important. But we need to basically build. So with Warcry, anyone remembers poor Warcry? R.I.P. my boy. GW killing all my favorite games. They did also kill Kill Team, which was my other favorite game of theirs. So, you know. And I'm not commentating on like the state of current Kill Team. No, I mean previous Kill Team. Absolutely love that game. And it's dead now. So now you just play one-page rules, Grimdark Future Firefight, which is old Kill Team. If you didn't know that, pro tip right there. There you go. All right, so we have our 2 event tables. We need an event table at the end of the mission, and we need an event table at when you open loot. Okay. Now we need to make the campaign, right? We need to set up the actual mission that you're on. Okay. So we need to go into those event cards, like from All Warcry, RIP my boy. We need to go into those and basically make a automated version of the event deck from Warcry. Now the event deck from Warcry had a couple different pieces for it. It had deployments, it had objective, and it had a twist, right? I'm going to leave out the twist. Why am I going to leave out the twist? The twist is interesting, but the twist is the kind of things that I think are also potentially interesting at the end of a round. I think there's interesting, a lot of those kind of things like, oh, you know, the sun is high and your guys can't see or something like that. I think that kind of stuff's kind of interesting at the end of a round. So we could do it at the end of the round. We could also turn that into a conditions table, right? We could do like an environment or conditions table and see what happens there. But we definitely need the objectives, right? And we definitely need some kind of deployment. Now, I think it's more interesting if you do let me rephrase that. I think the way of doing interesting deployment is not like player one is here, player two is here. I think it's actually here's a whole bunch of spawn points. Let's figure out what goes on each one of them. I think that's kind of cooler and it makes it more random, right? So with using that kind of method, you could potentially wind up right next to a piece of treasure, or you could potentially wind up right next to an enemy. And I think that's kind of cool, how that could work, right? I think that leaves a lot of potential for, oh man, you know, crazy shit's about to happen, you know. I think that's kind of cool. Um, so we're gonna need a random event table, or not a random event table, a random placement on X number of markers. Now, what would that actually look like from an app perspective? Um, well, we would need to show the user the deployment, right? And then we would need to show the user what goes on each one of those points, and presumably do that on one click. All right. So um, all this should basically be one click. There shouldn't have to be multiple go arounds of this for people. It should be like you hit the button and the thing happens. And it does it all. So we need to show them the map, right? For that, we're going to use some kind of canvas. Canvas is like a front-end developing kind of framework thing. Um, and we're going to draw points on it. And then we are going to assign something to those points. So we should be able to do that by making a canvas, assigning a marker type to each one, like, you know, oh, this one's a skull, this one's a guy, this one's a treasure chest, right? Something that's pretty fucking obvious to people. And then drawing them all as locations on the canvas. So you'll wind up with a location for everything, an icon that kind of tells you what it is. And I think that should work pretty darn well. Now, at the same time, we're also going to need to determine starting enemy forces, right? So this is going to be a random roll for a number of enemies, right? Now, logically, we should be able to dictate a difficulty here as well for the starting number of enemy forces. So let me start taking some notes while this dries. Okay. There we go. Whoop, 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 whoop. Okay. All right, let's see what we got. So we're going to need an end of round event table. We need a pick up treasure event table. And then we need a mission setter upper canvas with themed icons for what goes on each starting deployment location. Okay. Now the user is going to need a control for this. Okay, they're going to need a control for how many enemies are going to show up. So like difficulty slider determines starting enemies. They're also going to need one for like loot, right? So loot slider determines loot on map. Okay. And that's going to be essentially deployment, right? It's going to have those two elements that the users can modify, and then it is going to build a canvas, put markers on the canvas, turn those markers into a themed icon that tells you what's supposed to go in each one of them. Like your team goes here, the enemy goes here, like that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to need for the table setup. Now we need a goal. All right. So how do you do a goal? Um, the goal is the hardest part, in my opinion, because you want a mission that is fun for the user, um, achievable, obviously very important, um, but also thematic, right? So you don't want anything crazy that requires like super crazy setup, right? Like I don't thinking about like Stargrave, right? Like the Stargrave campaign is very fun. Um, However, it requires stuff like walls and like a fucking train at one point and all this kind of stuff, right? Um, so how do we make missions essentially like the goals of missions that still work, right? Now, when you play Frostgrave with another person, the goal is to get the loot before the other person does, right? You're essentially rats like in a maze fighting over cheese. Okay. And that's not a bad goal, to be honest. Um, a hard one to duplicate from an AI perspective, but not a bad like target, right? So definitely not something that we want to just be like, oh, we don't want to do that because that's for multiplayer, right? Um, so maybe for our goal, we break it down into two different goals, or at least give the user a selector. So maybe we give them a selector for another team. Maybe that's what we do, right? And this helps to split our goals into two different things, right? So now we have missions that are going to have an enemy team and missions that are not going to have an enemy team. Now, this is important because if the player, since it's a mini agnostic game, right, and it's kind of what we're going to focus on, since the player might not have another team set up or ready to go, we don't want them to get a mission that requires another team. Okay, because that would be frustrating for them. Because they're gonna be like, oh well, I only have these 6 guys, right? Like, we don't want to be like, well, you actually needed to bring 22 guys because you also have to do the enemies, right? Like that's not what we want to do here. So we're gonna have to have some kind of selector of whether or not another team is on the board. All right. Now all these selectors we can actually just we can have these pre-selected with something, right? So like by default, that new team won't be on the board. Um, Stuff like that, right? Like so the user's not going to have to click these buttons, but they're going to have the ability to if they want to fine tune their experience, um, which is the value of this over a rolling table, because a rolling table you would basically have to have different tables for each one, but with this it's going to be behind the scenes. Like those tables are still going to exist, but they're not going to exist where you have to like go to page 72 and then go to page 41. Like that's not going to be that situation. All right, we're not going to get stuck in the 5 Leaves from Borderlands situation where we're kind of flipping through the map 40 or the book 40 trillion times, spending 40 minutes before we even get to put a model on the table. All right, so All right. So we're going to have a selector for our other team or not. Okay. That's good. And then what do we do from there? Well, we need to determine a goal. Because if there is another team, presumably they could still have multiple goals, but it's going to also unlock other team specific goals in the mission, right? It's just not going to be an all or nothing kind of thing. Like, we're not going to say, oh, your only mission here is looting if, there's no other team on the board. Although we could, and then just increase the number of monsters. Ooh, that's a good idea. That would actually work really well. Fascinating. All right, sorry. Okay, so we need a bunch of objectives. Now, again, these are going to get drawn onto the canvas. We need to put these on the canvas as we create them. So, that's going to just be something to consider for this. Now, we want the objectives to be interesting and thematic. So we don't necessarily just want like go to point A, right? We want like a specific kind of theme to them. And that's going to make it hard. It's going to make it very hard trying to get theme and narrative to come across when you can't fully dictate everything like you can in a campaign book. So, it's going to be tough. All right. Okay. So those need to dry for a minute. We'll let them dry for a minute. And let's do some doodling, actually, if you guys don't mind. Let's do some doodling, because if we start looking at how this thing's gonna look, light mode, no. It's gonna help us kind of formulate what this is gonna eventually be. Okay, so first off, much better. All right. Okay. All right. So if this is, let's say this is our app, right? We're going to actually have it look like this because we also want it to work on phones. So we'll have it set up for mobile first. All right. So say this is our app. Okay. I'm going to need a couple of different things, right? So we're going to need some kind of navigation. Now, if this is set up to be on a phone, we should really put the navigation over here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll make ourselves a menu on the right side here. Right. And then inside that menu, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make ourselves some buttons. So this is going to be stuff like the end of turn and things like that. So one of these might be end of turn button. One of these might be the, no, I want this one. So this might be like the end of turn button. This one might be the loot button. This one might be the campaign button, right? And as you click those, this content here, this workspace is going to change. Now, this menu is going to collapse down to this, and then here we'll have an icon, right? So you'll end up with this little bar on the side, and kind of like icons that you're going to be able to hit with your thumb. Um, and then you'll also be able to expand this out if you want to. So you'll get like an arrow or something, right? It's going to let you expand that out. I think this is also where I'm going to put the like descriptive text of what this is, and the logo. The logo will go on this here too, right? And then this will get shrunk and collapsed here when the menu collapses. And then all this text will just go away when the menu collapses. All right, so that's going to be the basic navigation in the app. Now, what is going to be in this main screen? Well, if we're on the campaign tracker, we're going to need to see that deployment map. Right, so we're going to need to see the deployment map. And then we're going to need a description of the different icons. Okay, so we'll probably put those down here somewhere, like Ymirnir, 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 right? So it's going to be a description of the different icons that are on the map. And then your map's going to end up looking like here's an icon with a 1 next to it, icon with a 2, this one's an icon, different kind of icon with a 1, like that, right? You're going to wind up with sort of like this deployment map up here at the top. Now, let's see what is going to be in here. This is going to be the body for our description. This area is going to be for like what our objective, what our goal is going to go here. All right, and then do we want to set a round length? I think we'll choose not to do round lengths. Yeah, I think we won't do round lengths. Now, if we have our goal there, do we maybe want to do twists? Or like, I guess an environment setting instead of a twist? Do we like the idea of an environment? I think the idea of an environment setting is kind of cool, to be honest. Right, and we would have a description of what the environment setting is in this case. Now, if you get one you really absolutely hate, I think having a button to re-roll them independently is important. So next to each one of these, we're going to have one of those little arrow guys to say re-roll this. Right. And then down, actually, I guess we'll actually put it here at the bottom. This is where the controls for the overall thing will go. So our checkbox for different enemies, our like difficulty slider is going to go here, that kind of stuff, right? Our slider, what was the other thing we need a slider for? Difficulty slider, loot slider. Okay. So we're going to need both of those, and we're going to have our checkbox for our enemies there as well, if we have an enemy team. Yeah, I think that'll work fairly well as far as a setup goes. Um, I want to do another button though, because I would like to do all of the enemy stats and stuff in this as well. Like I think I want that in this same display. So I think I want a button here that is enemies like that, right? And we have our icon right there. And I think when you hit it, you're going to get what you'll get is something that looks like this. Um, what you'll get is you'll get like a header for the enemy, a number to go with it on the spawn chart, right? And then you'll also get a description of stats for the enemy and like a description of what the enemy is. So you'll get like all their stats and everything, like the same kind of way you do with one-page rules. I think that'll work really well. Um, so that everything about the enemy is right there on that tab. Now, what would be really neat is if we had a menu somewhere to dictate what your game of choice is. Are you playing Frostgrave? Are you playing one-page rules? And then when you pick that, the stats on this enemy menu change. That would be really cool. However, um, we're going to start off building this for Frostgrave because that's what I want to play. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to set this up for Frostgrave and kind of go from there, right? Taking eating an apple little piece by little piece, right? And then, because this is a lot of pieces, this is a good bit of work. It's at least a day or two of work to do this. Just because the logic and writing the tables and stuff is going to be a little complicated, as it's going to have a lot of variables in it. Um, but yeah, so I think that's a pretty good spot to start. Um, okay, now I've taken a little break to think about how how do we want the objectives to work? There's a couple different ways you could do objectives. Okay. You could um you could have predetermined like missions and then pull from a list of those. Now this is how things like a mission deck or like a mission table in the back of a book, this is how stuff like that works. And it's a good way to do it. I'm not going to lie. It works well. It's fairly quick as far as rolling tables go. Um, but is there a cooler way to do that? How do we split that kind of mission up? So let's think. like a mission type, I guess, right? So I guess it's like escort, kill, um, loot, right? So I guess you would have what? You would have like pillage where you'd try to go in and destroy something, right? You'd have loot, you'd have where you try to get something off the board, right? I guess you could have a rescue where you try to get one target off the board and the enemy tries to kill it while you do that. Um, right? You would have like an assassinate, I guess, as well. You could. So I guess you could also have a defend, right? Where you try to hold on to a um, where you try to hold on to an objective at the end of every round. Now, I guess you would really want your end of round table to be unique for each one of these. Because in a defense mission, for example, you want there to be more enemies. Um, and you would want that to escalate to more and more and more and more over the like duration of the game, I guess. So like you would wind up with a situation where how would that work? You'd wind up with a situation where like your end table is actually tied to your mission. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. I think that's actually could work pretty well. Um, so your end mission is not um, it's not like universal. Then I guess you would have depending on the mission you're playing, you would have kind of like different situations. So I guess before you could even use that table, you would have to use the main app, which I think is fine. I think that's fine. I don't necessarily need all the parts of this app to be independent, right? It's actually kind of cooler if they all work together, to be honest. Um, okay, so you're going to, what are you going to do? You're going to pick a mission and you're going to get a mission type, right? And then I guess based on difficulty, you're going to. All right, so let me make some more notes because I think that makes sense. All right, so you're going to uh, uh, mission type, and that could be kill, defend, rescue. Rescues, you got to get it off the board. Kill, defend, rescue, loot. I guess you would have pillage, which I guess would be like a destroy mission, right? You'd be trying to get in, destroy a number of targets, and then get out. What else ones could you have? Because your kill would count both killing the boss and killing a X number of enemies, right? Like kill 30 Tyranids or whatever, right? Like that those would both be kill. Um I guess you could differentiate kill and assassinate. Yeah, let me do that. We would differentiate kill and assassinate. Um all right, so you're going to pick a mission and then the number of objectives is dictated by difficulty slider. How do you spell assassin? Oh, it's two S's. Number of objectives dictated by difficulty slider. Okay. Um, so we have kill missions, we have defend missions, we have rescue, we have loot, we have destroy, assassinate. Because rescue is also going to include escape, because escape by itself is kind of lame. You have to get to something and get it off the board is a lot more interesting than just you have to get yourself off the board. All right, so you'd have these mission types. What happens? All right, and those mission types are going to each dictate the end of round. The end of round chart or end of round options. And that should make that a little more thematic, I think. Because that way, when you do like defend, right, you're going to constantly be getting like more and more waves of enemies, right? And then for the case of defend, your difficulty is going to determine how many rounds you defend for and how many enemies show up as well. So. Right, like that difficulty slider in a couple of cases is going to be pulling some double duty for some of these missions, I think. Okay, so what is our... So we have our end of mission event table, right? We have our deployment and enemy spawn locations map. We are going to need a what happens when you loot stuff. Environments. So we need to talk about in the environments. What happens with an environment? In Warcry, this included things like, oh, I can't see because it's too dark and stuff like that. And I think stuff like that is probably pretty good. And essentially, you would just get one that would happen for the entirety of the game. So make it a little bit easier to remember, right? Because then you only have one essential game condition, right? It's not like it's not like every round you have a different one, right? So and then what we can do to make it easier on the old broken memory that I've got, every round when we have our end table, that end table can always be something that happens on the board. So it'll always be something like you put a new piece of rubble terrain in the way of a door, or everybody falls down, or something like that, right? Like it'll always have a physical effect on the board. Or a new enemy spawns or something like that, right? Like it's never going to be just an exercise in bookwork. It's going to always be a physical thing on the table. Now, this is going to let us make it a little bit easier to remember, because mental load is actually important and is, for a person like me who's pretty fucking broken, mental load is actually what is tiring, right? It's not like an introvert extrovert thing because I'm probably actually an extrovert. Um, but it's usually having to remember to be a people when I'm interacting with people that makes interacting with people tiring, more so than the fact that I don't like interacting with people. Like there's a difference there. Um, so with these kind of situations, right? Like with these tables that we're making, how do we reduce the mental load? Um, I think one of those is making the after event table always something that appears on the table. I think appears on the game. I think that's a really good step toward reducing mental load. Having our enemies be having our enemy stats kind of be there in the app, I think is also a good thing. Which does mean I'm not going to be able to use any of the official apps or the official enemy types, unfortunately, because those are all proprietary, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to have to make my own up, which is fine, right? That just means I'm going to have slightly different rules for goal or whatever, right? That's fine. Um, what would be neat is for the enemies having a table or like a checkbox of the ones you want to see and don't want to see. Like maybe you don't have undead, right? Maybe you only have knights. So maybe you want knights instead. Um, I'll make a note of that in a second once I'm done with this brace. Because I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good feature. All right, let's see. We got those supposed to be. I think these are supposed to be metal braces, to be honest. So we'll go ahead and paint them like they're metal braces. Yeah, coming along. Yeah, you can see I'm trying to not do like full total crazy coverage for all these things, right? I want it to look kind of knackered there, you know? All right, so let's make a note on our handy dandy notepad here. Um, oh, that's right. We were gonna do for um, let's see. We're gonna make a note for end of round table. Um, only events that physically show up on board. All right, and that should help to reduce the mental load pretty significantly, because then you're only going to need to remember the one environmental condition, not a condition changing every round. So I think that's a good call. Um, all right, so let's see. We want for enemies. Um, we want selector for enemy types. Same for random monsters. Okay, so that way you're going to be able to like, if you don't have a ghast model, you're going to be unable to uncheck ghasts, so you're not going to get it in your random monsters, right? Because stuff like random monsters showing up is going to be good for events when like you loot an item or at the end of the round. Those are going to be good end of round kind of events. Um, so we want to make sure that there's a selector to turn those off. So right, so like if you're deep underground, you don't want to get to a situation where like you summon a gigantic dragon, right? Because the fucker's just not gonna fit, you know. Um, you're gonna need some kind of agency over what's in that list, right? And by default, I'll just leave everything on, and then we'll turn some things on and off. Okay, so let's see. We have how our goal is going to be calculated. We have how that's going to display to the user on the map. How it's going to be dictated by difficulty from the difficulty slider. Um, our environment slider, our end of table is done. What else do we have? I'll pull our shitty UI drawing up in a second, and that should maybe help us decide some more. Let me just finish some more of this brass really quick. The GW terrain is so filled with details. Like it's almost a little too detailed, to be honest. Like um it's kind of more fun to like start with something less detailed and then get to add your own details than it is to start with something super mega detailed. Because I had a lot of fun, for example, on my like dungeon cube thing I was making. Which round 2 of that, by the way, is sitting right next to me. I need to print off like a couple more pieces, and then she's ready for painting after that. Like with that, going back and doing things like the um, the candles and stuff was really fun. But again, like if you don't want to like do that, right? This is a lot easier kind of out of the box is just to use the details that are here. But it'd be kind of cool if like, instead of stuff like one of these has a like a poster on the wall, it would have been kind of neat if instead of that they'd given you a poster. You could just put it wherever you wanted. That would have been neater. Yeah, it's still a cool terrain though. I like it a lot. I wish there was actually more that matched it. Because I looked at the GW website and they have more of this terrain, but it's literally just the same 2 pieces. There's no like additional bits for it. And so I was like, man, it'd be kind of cool to have um, this as like a busted city because it's got some personality. All right. All right, let's look at our illustration real quick. Hello. All right, so here's our illustration. So let's just run through the elements again. So we have our logo, we have our expand contract button, we have our description of what the app is. When the menu is contracted, you see this with a little logo at the top, and then each one of these has an icon. And then when it's expanded, you get the full description of each button. One of these buttons is the enemies, which is this one right here. leads to that view. One of these buttons is the campaign map, which is what this description's already on. One of these is the end of turn thing, and one of these is the loot for when you loot a marker. Down here we have the icons and descriptions of what each icon is. We have our environment variable and the ability to re-roll it. We have our goal, the ability to re-roll it. And then this is our canvas with the locations of each thing on it. And then here, here, and there, this is going to be our other team checkbox. We're going to have a difficulty slider, and we're going to have an amount of loot slider. And then over here in the enemies, we're going to need a new header, which is going to let us do like drop downs of enemy type, right? Is what that's going to make us, that's going to let us do right there. Now, this is going to give us the number of enemies and the location. So 1, 1, like that. Oh, is there a better way to do that? Is there a better way to do that? So, all right, let's talk about that a little bit. So if we look at each enemy type, right, placed on the map, presumably we would actually like those not to be static groups. We would like the groups in there to be dynamic and have different potential to have different monsters in them, right? So like you could have a group with like 2 shooters and like a brute, right? Something like that, I think would be the coolest option, or the coolest end result. So I guess when we look at enemies on the enemy table, what we're actually going to need to look at is the enemies in relation to them on the map. So each one of those map markers is going to need to get a point, and then it's going to tell you what enemies are at that point with their stats. So instead of it being one big table with just the different kinds of enemies that are on your table, it's going to tell you the different kinds of enemies, inadvertently how many there are, and also all of their stats. So we're going to basically kind of have to expand out this enemy function a little bit here. And I think that end result should be pretty dope, though. So because then you'll basically get a list of what's on the table. Now, I guess that means you can go in, you're going to have to be able to go in and click and kill each enemy like you can in one-page rules. Let me think about that for a second. Because that's just more micro, and I'm trying to reduce the amount of micro. However, that little micro does free up brain power of having to remember what's on the table. Although in truth, I guess after spawning, the enemies aren't really going to be in those groups anymore. So while it's useful for setting them up, it's not necessarily a key piece of information to keep them grouped in that way. So maybe what I actually want to do is I actually want to display the enemies independent of each one, and then tell you where they started, but not necessarily keep them in the groups, if that makes sense. Because the models are going to move around separate. So I would essentially spawn each enemy type or each enemy. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that's the better way to do it. That's the better way to do it. So let's see. Let's make some more notes. Um, Spawn each enemy